Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 75 of the White-Knuckle podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Thanks again for tuning into the White-Knuckle podcast, episode number 75. Today we're going to talk with Scott from Extreme Custom Food Plots. Scott is I guess I would call it a land artist, a land sculptor. After talking with him yesterday here at the Deer Fest in Wisconsin, we hit it off right away, and I was able to learn about a lot of the cool stuff that he does with all the cool equipment. And who doesn't like cool equipment? I think I could sit in my office for hours and watch some of these forestry implements that mount on the front of a skid steer or whatever the case. But after seeing how he took one property and just sculptured it and made it into a deer mecca, I was entranced at the way that he thought and the way that he did things. So yes, Scott's a real-world wildlife products dealer, but in addition to that, he's a land sculptor. So I hope you get something out of this episode and you can put some of his ideas to work on your property. With that, here's the show. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the White-Knuckle podcast. I am joined today shortly by David, who's on his way in. We're at the Deer Fest here in West Bend. And today our guest is Scott from Extreme Custom Food Plots. And don't let the name fool you. After talking with him yesterday, he does a lot more than food plots. I guess probably the end result is a food plot, isn't it? Yeah,
the end result is property that people can enjoy. Food plots are probably 50% of our business, along with some other land management stuff as far as trail mowing, clearing, redneck blinds. We do quite a few of.
So, some of the stuff that you showed me yesterday, it sounds like if I was a landowner and came to you with a problem, you go in and solve their problem. If it's something with, say, food plot architecture or even, you're showing me yesterday what you did with that gentleman's property who had the fence line issue. You've got equipment for just about every part of or every aspect of being a land manager, don't you?
Yeah, when we started this, every time we went to buy a piece of equipment, we did a little bit of research on how we wanted that project or that installation to work. And some of the equipment we have for doing that, honestly, you probably would have to travel 2 or 3 states away to find a like piece. Our tree puller, as an example, is one of 5 in the country. So, we try and do our homework when we're going to buy a piece of equipment because we know that's going to be a direct reflection of the finished product when we work on someone's property.
So what's a typical customer like? Because again, the name suggests I call you, you come put my food plot in, but it's really so much more than that. And now we're in the fall food plot time. But it looks to me like the majority of your work, at least the heavy lifting, so to speak, is done earlier in the year.
Yeah, what we try and do is March and April and even that first 2 weeks in May, get people's property conditioned and ready for food plots, clear trails, to get them ready for when the season starts. And then even midsummer, we'll do some of the land clearing. One project, the one I talked to you about yesterday and kind of showed you, that was a year-long project. The landowner's grandpa planted a bunch of pine and spruce trees on a 60-acre property, and back then they planted them right up to the fence lines. So they were trying to hunt the property with really no access to their own property because the trees literally were the fence post.
Sure.
So what we did is we moved in about 4 rows of trees, and these trees are 30, 40 feet tall, mowed out 3 wide, and then left that sit last fall and came in this spring with a new tool we bought that goes behind a tractor, and it actually rototills the stumps right out of the ground and basically makes mulch of them. So it's ready to plant. So we took all those trails, that mile long of trails, and installed a fall food plot 2 weeks ago.
Really? Okay. So do you often get, let's back up. you talked about conditioning a food plot. What all goes into conditioning a food plot, whether it's spring or fall?
Yep. When you show up on someone's property, the soil types are all different. The shapes of the property are all different. So, some of the biggest things are getting some of the bigger stones off, getting Roundup sprayed down in a timely fashion so that, you can come in 2 to 3 weeks later and till those up. Some of the properties we get on, they have a bunch of little slashings in their food plot and need that removed. So prepping all of that stuff just before the big rush of actually installing food plots to keep us moving on a timely manner.
Okay. So you have the ability to go in. Let's say someone that just bought a piece of property comes to you with 200 acres. What is it that you look for in terms of maybe land features or structure, topography, something like that? When someone asks you to give them an idea or essentially consult with them on how to build their property.
Yep. One of the first things that, first of all, I've been doing the food plot thing for pay professionally for 4 years. Prior to that, we did it about 10 years on our own property. And our own property is pretty flat. So that was a very good place to start because some of the most challenging properties to work with are the flat properties. The deer, the topography doesn't direct them or funnel them as well as a property that's hilly or has valleys or creeks or, contour
Right.
that's not flat. So you start using plot screens and different types of things to try and funnel deer to a certain area on the flat ones.
Okay. So what's an example of a plot screen? Are you planning like Egyptian wheat?
Yeah, we'll do Egyptian wheat. We will also use sorghums. We'll use switchgrasses, bedding in a bag from Real World, something that's a little more permanent. What we found with the Egyptian wheats is that when you plant them time and time again in the same spot, they leave so much residual stalk in that area that there's a huge nitrogen requirement the next year to get that plot screen to look as good as it did the previous year.
Okay. So you go back in and you add the nitrogen into the soil, and you'll probably have the same amount of luck. Let's go back to bedding in a bag, because that's something that Real World offers that isn't talked about just a ton. Is it feasible to think that I could have a 15-acre CRP field and seed that in bedding in a bag and truly have 15 acres of bedding?
Yeah, we just actually did that on our farm. We have an 80-acre property. 20 of it is hardwoods, and the hardwoods is the nicest maple you could find, so we really didn't want to hinge cut it, which leaves us with 60 acres of tillable ground, which isn't the best, flat tillable ground, which isn't the best for holding deer. And what we did last year in May is we planted about 15 acres of that in bedding in a bag. So last gun season was the first time that I actually sat over it and watched it for an extended period of time. It is incredible, the deer movement, all day, every day.
Really?
Yeah, every day. You'd be watching. We got a 15-foot redneck set up on the corner of it, so you can kind of see down in most of it. And all of a sudden, you'd be looking, and you'd see a deer standing up in the grass, and it'd stand there for 5-10 minutes looking around, and then lay right back down.
And so it is feasible to think that you can have, versus planting, oak trees or hardwoods, whatever the case may be, that's going to take, an inordinate amount of time, more time than what I've got. It is feasible to think that you could take that open piece of ground and turn it into, 15 acres of bedding or 10 acres or what's too much and what's not enough in your opinion?
Not enough would probably be in the vicinity of 5 acres. 4 or 5 acres would probably be the smallest that I'd recommend planting. I really don't think there's too much, because as you plant the bedding grasses, whether that's switchgrass or bedding in a bag, you can put a sequence of food plots through there, some travel corridors for bucks and does, and you can kind of take a 80-acre bedding project, put food plots through it, and move deer through it, and funnel them right to where you want.
to think, well, let me reframe that question. Would you say that an 80-acre landowner, I guess at first glance you'd look at that and go, well, that's just not a ton of land to work with. But what is it that you would do with an 80 acres to improve it to the point that it's a viable place to hunt deer? At least effectively.
Right. First of all, I think if I was personally buying a piece of property, I would have no more than 50% woods on it. And the reason that is because I can sculpture the rest of it to make it a great deer hunting area. So the guy that owns 80 acres of farmland, they probably do this quite a bit in Iowa, is plant some bedding grasses, put the food plots through it to get the movement that you need and require to be able to hunt those deer and hold them. On our property, part of the reason we did what we did is the neighbors over the fence line start going in there quite a bit in October, and I think they're going to bump those deer into our bedding grass, and that's where they're going to make their home for the late season.
Okay. Interesting. Dave, welcome.
Hey, good morning. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. What I was going to do is pull up, for instance, the property that we used to hunt a lot, Dave, and then maybe even your family farm, and have Scott take a look at that and give us his 2 cents on what he would do with that. But before we get too far into it, do you have any questions specifically that you wanted to ask Scott about?
Give me a second to settle. So, Scott, how long have you been doing this?
Professionally doing the food plots for 4 years as a company, and then about 10 years prior to that, we were doing them with it was funny listening to Todd yesterday, how he puts us in with a four-wheeler and burns up four-wheelers and whatnot. That's exactly what we were doing for the first 10 years.
Sure.
And, about 4 years ago, we had burnt up a four-wheeler, and I'm like, let's just go buy a no-till corn planter, and we'll be able to do our beans and our corn with a no-till. Well, I was going to lease a tractor, and you can't find them at that time of year. So we ended up buying our first tractor, and in a matter of 4 years, we probably, with trucks and equipment, have $800,000 in equipment now. So
sure. Yeah,
set
I
up
see the
pretty
pictures
well.
over there. It's impressive.
Yeah.
So as we look at this property, you can see there's a significant amount of timber outside of what we've got to play with, but there's in effect 20 acres of timber there, which isn't that out of character for the average landowner, at least in Wisconsin. Wouldn't you agree, Scott?
Right. We really get on, it seems like, two types of properties. We get the guys that call us that, have 20 to 60 or 80 acres. And then we have the guys that call that have, 300 up to 600, 700, 800 acres. So those are kind of the two groups that seem to be looking for help. And some of those smaller properties, I got one in mind near Tigerton that the gentleman bought. I think it's about 60 acres. It's one of the most impressive properties I've been on since I've been doing this. And he has mature bucks on there continuously, but between putting in some apple trees, doing some food plots, some bedding grasses, all of those things are adding to the quality of what he's seeing there.
So we come to you with a property like this, and there's a significant amount of agriculture. This is all agriculture. There's a little piece of timber and a smaller piece of timber. Am I wrong in assuming that agriculture is going to pull in more deer than any food plot that you can put in?
Yeah, when you're around agriculture, what I would like to do with those is there's a good food source there for a good part of the year. Mm-hmm. But, then harvest comes along depending on what they have planted in those. Harvest comes around sometime in October, just prior to the best hunting. Mm-hmm. And they'll clean those fields off. And we see this in Missouri when we go hunting. Some of the newer combines and newer equipment, they don't throw nothing out.
Right.
I mean, they got heads on there that don't drop beans on the ground. The machines are tight. Where you used to see deer when you'd shoot them full of beans in their belly, there's no beans in their belly anymore. So counting on harvest loss for a food source is getting tougher and tougher. On this property that you're showing me, I think if a person did incorporate some bedding in there, some of your own food plots, so that once harvest took place, those deer are going to probably bed in there all year round, probably sneak over the fence to get a bite to eat and come right back.
So you'd start with bedding.
Yep.
So specifically, what bedding would you do? Bedding in a bag, or are you talking about some selective timber harvest?
You could for the bedding area, the bedding grass that I would look at on this property.
Okay.
If it's a property, I always tell people, if you can walk in it 8 months out of the year with a pair of tennis shoes on, you probably can lean towards the bedding in a bag. Bedding in a bag needs to be a little more on like an upland property, not a swampy, wet type of property.
Okay.
This looks fairly dry to me, looking at the screen with the elevations and stuff.
The bottom half would
a little bit
right,
wet.
as you get down toward the drainage. But like you're talking about putting in bedding, whereabouts are you looking? I mean, where do you focus?
I would focus on where the fields are to the right of your screen there, where the neighbor's cropping that pretty heavily.
Mm-hmm.
I would be bedding, that more right edge,
Gotcha.
leaving a little buffer around there to put some food plots in, and then up in the top corner where most of the trees are on there, I would kind of start food plotting those corners in there. And even on the bottom where it does look a little wetter, you could even switch that up to more of a switchgrass than a bedding in a bag. That'll tolerate the moisture a little bit more than the bedding in a bag will, even though the bedding in a bag has a couple pounds of switchgrass in it.
Okay, so just for those of you who aren't going to have a picture to reference, this property lays out primarily in a rectangle. The rectangle runs east to west, with the the largest section being east to west, and north to south is a little bit shorter. And on the west side, there's a small triangle, if you will, of timber, and the rest of it really, by and large, is cropland. On the far east side, there's a road that borders here. And what you're saying, Scott, is because of all the ag over here, you would give these. Is your thought process putting bedding in a bag here on this ag land to give the deer a place that they're not having to travel so far to get to that food?
Yeah, and the other thing too is with the bedding in a bag and croppable ground, what you want to watch for, we signed ours up, we just put it in last spring, so we would have signed up, I think it would have been the fall of 16, putting ours in CRP. So we ended up with $135 an acre payment to put it in a CRP program, which we could install the bedding grass. So we're taking a full payment on that property. And that sign-up comes around about every 3-4 years usually. So
okay.
From what I hear, I don't know how much credibility there is to it, but I heard in 2019 they're looking at tossing around another sign-up for CRP. So, for people that own ag land and they're receiving an income from a cash grain person on that, there's an opportunity when that CRP comes around that you can sign that up, put a lot of that in bedding grass. They'll allow up to 10% into food plots. So if you sign up a 100-acre parcel, you can put up to 10 acres of food plots on there.
Sure. Okay, yeah, and in on the property that I'm leasing, that's exactly what the guy has done. Is I believe it's a 12 or 18 acre field, and
yep.
and I think we've got 4 different food plots on it. But keeping on track here with this property, so there's not a lot that you would do with the timber to start out with. You'd start with putting some bedding in an area, and the whole premise behind that is so that they're not having to travel as far to those.
Right. You're holding them on the property, and the thing with the bedding grass, like the stuff we planted, and there's pictures in our booth, but the stuff we planted last spring was planted on May 15th. And on July 15th, it looked like a bad oats catch. I mean, it was 2 inches tall. The field was brown. When you plant these bedding grasses, they come extremely slow. It takes patience. But by October of last year, it was shoulder high on me. So,
really,
yeah, the planting year takes. We have to coach anybody that we plant for, because after it's planted 2 weeks, the phone's ringing already. Hey, nothing's coming up. Nothing's coming up. It literally takes 6 weeks before you see anything green on that field. And in that 6 weeks, what those seeds are doing is actually going down and developing a root system. So how I've been explained it is when you plant bedding grass, if you planted a row of beans and a row of corn next to a row of bedding grass, and at 45 days, if you looked how tall the corn was, that's how much root the grass has put on. So the grass is growing the other way. Once it develops a good root system,
then it comes up?
Then it comes up.
Okay.
Now, Scott, let's just say a property like this, how much work do you do in what we'll call access cover for a hunter? I mean, because that's pretty open, and that's always been the struggle there is how do you get in and out?
Yep. And
as far as running something, through there.
And we would use, I see the neighbor has, is that a driveway I see above the red line there or something like that? Right up here I see a...
Yeah. Yep, it's like a logging road.
Sometimes we will try and utilize neighbor's property if that can work. Or we could take a mulcher like we have and actually create trails in there and then use harvesting some of the timber to kind of make a nice canopy to walk in so that you're not disturbing the deer. The timber stuff we like to put off for a year or two just because once you plant bedding grass, it completely and totally changes the traffic path. It totally changes the deer.
So you wait to see how they react.
Wait to see how they react to that, and then so it's when you work on a property, I'm going to say it's a 2 to 4 year, 2 to 5 year process where as you plant food plots in certain areas, that also will change where the deer travel. So to me, getting bedding in is on a property like yours is initially, what we really target first.
That makes sense. Interesting. So let's assume that that's done. What's the next step? Because clearly, this if I were to buy this property, and I think it totals in is that
looks
40 acres, Dave?
80.
It's an 80.
Like,
80.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I can't do math. So it's an 80-acre parcel. It would be a representative of what a lot of folks in Wisconsin end up paying a king's ransom for. And a lot of it's ag, and certainly there's income there. But if you're looking to take, some of that land that you're making income off of, to take 5 acres out of that isn't really a big deal, or even 10.
Right.
Isn't that big of a deal. It's expensive at first, but how long does that bedding in a bag last?
From what we've seen, about every third year you end up burning it off. So a lot of times when we plant it, we'll plant like a 30-foot clover border along any wood line, so that when they do come to burn it, and there's companies that will come and do that for you, that it's a buffer between anything that would be a problem when you're burning and the bedding grass.
Okay.
From what I've heard talking with Don, he hasn't ever had to really reseed any of his, and I think he's got some that's over 10 years on his farm.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yep. Weeds would probably be your worst enemy in that stuff, and when we plant it for someone or someone buys the seed from us, you have a very limited selection of herbicide that you can use on there. So weed control out the gate is number one, the first thing that has to happen. We do put some plateau down with the bedding in a bag when we plant it, so that we'll have a residual for about 90 days. After that, you can use 2,4-D the following spring.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So you can use some herbicide, and if you do get some weed pressure, you can do a little bit of mowing. Seems like once you get the weed control taken care of, those fields just get bushier and bushier and kind of take care of the weed control themselves. But they're not a plant it and drive away and don't come back for a year project. I mean, you're working on those every month or 6 weeks. You're spraying or mowing or doing something to get them right.
So what's the method to your madness when it comes to and madness may be a poor choice of wording, but you get this 5 or 10 acres of bedding in. What is it? How is it that you go about prescribing? Because really, that's what you're doing. Much like a doctor would prescribe a drug, you're prescribing what to do to make that property hold more deer, attract more deer. What would you plant? So we're, again, for those of you who can't see this, which is all of you, we're on the east side of the property, which actually borders a county highway, and we're talking about putting 5 or 10 acres of bedding in. What do you put along that? And I'm assuming you're going to hunt these deer with a redneck blind or some sort of elevated platform stand.
I have a 5 and a 2-year-old, so that's all we get to hunt out of. But on this property, with the road being to the east end of it, or the right side, we would be food plotting farther in from the road, obviously, because you want to give those deer a a sacred place to be, that they're not getting bumped and bothered. And we would incorporate the bedding grass in this picture. There's a chunk of woods would be probably to the north, and then the chunk that you own or lease would be to the west. We would try and incorporate those two woodses with bedding grass to give them a sacred place to travel between woodses, so that you can hunt the edges of both of those without having to go deep in there to do any type of hunting. And then the food plots would be up more towards where that 1,000 number is. That's kind of like the top of the hill there. I would be food plotting the edges of that, and the corners, trying to use
right in here.
Yeah. Yep. And up to the right of there a little bit.
Like there?
Yep.
Okay.
And then on the opposite end,
sure.
I probably would go in there, but access would be the big thing. You'd want to use that bedding grass to get into there.
So are you saying, and maybe we'll put a picture up on our, we'll definitely put a picture up on our Facebook page and on our website, because it'll be interesting for people to follow along with this map. I'm just going to draw a line of what I know to be a field road that separates this crop and this crop right here are always different. So this would be about the field road structure. Is what you're saying to do something like this and plant not a plot screen, but
a bedding grass, and you could incorporate, you could either go farther into that. I'm not sure what the acreage is on that green part, but
it's 11 acres.
11 acres. Yeah. So you could go a little bit into that and probably hold some bedding grass, out to here and kind of come across with it and make a travel through there so that you can pull deer out of here into here. Or vice versa.
Sure. So I guess that begs the question: how much is enough in a situation like that to get deer to come through there, to use that as a travel corridor?
Generally, I would like probably 50 feet wide on each side, so 100 feet total. With you're going to need probably 20 feet in between, 25 feet, because if you're too narrow, what we've found, I've heard of people that have mowed bedding grass to make a path through their 10 acres of bedding grass, and those big mature bucks will not walk that path. They will stay inside of that path in the tall grass yet.
So they want it wide.
A little bit wider, than a doe or fawn would walk through.
You know what I'm thinking right away, Dave, is buckthorn, and we'll get to that in just a minute.
Everybody's favorite.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So by doing that, 58 feet on each side, so you're talking 130 feet.
25 or 30 feet, yep.
Yep. And it gives Dave's dad and brother still access to get to where they need to go with farm machinery. That's not going to be foreign to the deer. They've heard it before. Yep. They'll hear it again. But it also creates a safe place for them to not walk across the open, and this road gets heavily shined. Heavily shined. Yep. But that would really, in my estimation, I guess is what you're thinking. That's going to encourage the deer to come out of this bigger block of timber and use this block of timber, or vice versa, come out of here and just use that as a travel corridor to get from A to B.
Looking at your pictures above the property to the north of you, looks like it's somewhat residential, looks like smaller. I don't know if that's contour lines. It's so far away.
Yes.
Or property lines, but
contour. Well, the thick orange on our Onyx map here is the property lines, and then the contours.
Yep. So I think that would actually do what it would do is push those deer into your food plots, because it's such a sanctuary up in that corner, and that would hold some deer. Now, when you bring them from the one woods to the other, where we talked about that 135-foot strip, I would not plant that strip straight, because you don't want a buck coming out at the end of a 40-acre field, raising his head on the hill and being able to check the whole field that quick. So you'd probably put some zigs and zags in there.
Sure.
Just to really, they're going to pop out, they're going to see the first 30, 40 yards, and they're going to have to just keep moving to check around every corner, which would move them right into the next woods, or probably where you'd have a stand hanging, is my guess.
That makes a lot of sense. Make them work it. Yeah.
So it's interesting. It seems, doesn't it, Dave? Doesn't it seem like duh?
Yeah, when he points it out, the architecture of it, there's a simplicity in it.
Yeah, there is. And so it's interesting to see how you just took 80 acres. That's largely agricultural, and you can keep that cash income still coming in if you owned it, and you were leasing it to a farmer, and you're really not taking that much out of that cash flow. Just how much do you think that improves overall? I mean, in my estimation, just because David and I have hunted that since we've been 12 or 14 or whatever, it would exponentially increase the deer traffic through there.
Yep. Do you mean monetarily or deer traffic?
I guess for the farmer that you're trying to sell this to, that's thinking about his crops, and those guys are hard to convince. How much does it affect them monetarily? And maybe you don't have that number because that might be hard to answer.
Well, there's a couple ways that we look at this. Like I said, our property's 80 acres. It's almost a similar layout as far as woods versus croppable ag ground. When I bought my property, I bought it because I wanted my own place to go hunt, my own place to go do what it is I like to do. So my initial thought in my mind is, I appreciate everything that my cousin does who rents our land, but yet at the same time, I didn't buy the property to just collect, $10,000 a year in rent money. I bought it to eventually develop into just strictly deer habitat so that my kids have a place to hunt and we have a place to enjoy what we love to do. So that being said, on this one, you can do that. You could definitely do that in pieces as a person can afford it. As far as deer traffic, anytime anyone does any type of habitat improvement, typically that same year you start noticing a huge difference on your property.
Well, let's jump to that because that's sort of the elephant in the room, I'm sure, for Dave. And that's this particular piece of timber. I guess you could call it a city park. Wouldn't you agree, David?
Maples have largely taken over.
Yep.
Since it was logged in the late 80s.
Yeah. Yep.
So
it for sure thinned it out. And
yep.
we've done a little bit of cutting in there to open the canopy, and the deer have definitely taken to it.
Yep. You can see kind of by zooming in the picture that you probably don't have a whole lot of undergrowth in there.
No.
No, you could see from one side to the other.
Yeah. That's similar to what our hardwoods is. I guess the decision the landowner would have to make at this point is, and that's why we always try and push, if we can, the bedding grass first, is because sometimes, like on our property, we put that in, and when I tell you it completely changed the deer traffic and the numbers and the travel times and everything, you can go there any time of day. If you know where to look on the property, you'll see deer any time of day.
Okay, interesting. So, just with respect to this piece of timber, is there anything, assuming we've done the other stuff that you've prescribed, is there anything that you would do here other than what Dave and I already did by going in and either hinge cutting a bunch of maples or just straight up cutting them down?
I think the balance, and that's what I should have finished my last answer with, I think the balance that a customer has to make after the bedding grass is in is this truly what I want for deer traffic, or is this not enough, or can I make it better by doing some hinge cutting, doing some select cutting, opening up a canopy, creating a bunch of young undergrowth? If that's something at that point that the customer feels, I could probably make this even a little better, which you probably would, because when you can stand in a hardwoods and you can see the posted sign 20 yards away or 20 acres away, it's not going to hold a whole lot of deer.
Right, and that's the struggle. But I guess the nice thing that I guess that we've learned is that even though there's only 80 acres and there's only 20 acres of timber, there's still a ton that you could do to very drastically change the viability of that as a hunting area.
Mm-hmm. In ours, when we harvested it 3 years ago, I think it was, they left all the tops behind because they wouldn't give you nothing for them.
Sure.
So I left the tops there, and you can drive in that hardwoods now, and there's deer bedded in those tops everywhere. So that's kind of a start to what you can do. But as soon as you selectively take that timber out, which you can see, I believe, where you guys did that on there, you're going to get a lot more young undergrowth, and you will get a lot more deer in there also. So if a person wants to go that far, they surely can. When it comes to the timber side of things, as far as the cutting, and that's not something that we do. We work with people that do that just because we're so busy with the food plots and that type of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, because the theory in it was to start thickening this, and we'll call it draw a line and leave that. We'll call it sanctuary, and then the rest, is just travel corridors. And obviously it's a better woods for bucks when they start cruising.
And by thickening this edge up, you're even pulling from some of this other stuff by doing that. Yep.
But I love your idea of creating a travel corridor that they feel secure, because they definitely do. I mean, if you open this up, they travel all of that.
Sure.
I mean, they'll cover a square mile in no time.
Yep. And what we noticed when we started doing this, food plot size too is important, because we started off with our first food plot on our own property at 6 acres. Well, you want to have a challenge, hunt 6 acres of flat ground with a bow.
Right.
That's probably about the hardest hunt you could have. So we started putting the plot screens in, and once we started doing that, I mean, you can walk out on that plot morning, noon, or night, and there's deer on it, and they feel safe, and they'll come out on it. But we've kind of changed our approach there, and we've broken those bigger plots down into like multiple micro plots, and then on the other plots that we plant on those properties, they're typically a lot smaller than that.
Todd spends a lot of time talking about his micro plots. How much a part of your planning are micro plots?
I think they're very important, because typically your bigger plot is your plot that's the farthest away from where the deer are coming from their bedding. The micro plot is something that the bucks that are a little shy, or 20 minutes, 30 minutes before dark, they might stage up in some of them smaller plots. So if you have decent access to be able to get in and out, that's probably, you'll kill more deer on there than you will on a 6 acre plot with a bow.
A question just popped into my mind. We were talking about this 20 acres of timber. At the end of the day, on a really good day, that's going to hold one mature deer at best. So you're really not looking at a property where you're going to be hunting a bedded deer in most cases. Would that be fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I agree. So is it feasible to think that because of the lack of value of timber, et cetera, that you could go in there and clear out a micro plot in a strategic place, or clear out an area for a micro plot right dead in the center of that? Or is that just an off-the-wall idea?
Placement, you'd have to obviously walk the property, because it's hard to tell from a picture, but I don't know that I'd go way down in there, but if you have an effective way to get in there and get out without doing a lot of disturbance, that could be very effective, because if you can get to the point where you can get in without them seeing you and get out without bumping them too much, you're coming a lot closer to where they live.
So when you're planning this all out, just like all of us do, access is huge.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to be able to get in and get out without disturbing as much as possible. I
mean, one of the biggest problems that we have is we hunt right here. I killed the second biggest deer in my life right there out of a blind, an elevated blind like a redneck. And I think the only reason that I did is because nobody was hunting, and nobody had hunted really that property, and everybody had stayed away. And I guess to expand upon that a little bit farther, the problem that we have in hunting in that, even though I think we've only shot one deer out of that field ever with a bow.
Yeah, very few.
Yeah, I mean, like I can't tell you how many times we've sat here and watched shooter after shooter after shooter after shooter come out of the neighbor's property, along this edge, and we're sitting there, from the outside looking in. What do you? So I guess the first thing is you would probably put a plot screen up along here so that you could get out of there.
Yep.
Because that's an 11-acre alfalfa field or bean field or cornfield. Fill in
so the other thing, too, is you can create a pinch up on that because you have no land. That field bumps up against the north property line and immediately starts to be woods. So you have some of the same issues that we had on our property with the same layout. A plot screen, even from up here on an angle coming down, when those deer come out, typically they don't like to cross through a good plot screen. They'd sooner walk around the end of it. So you could funnel those deer. Once they pop out, you could have a food plot up on that wet north end that starts skinnier on the east end and just keeps getting wider as it goes down the field. And those deer would walk the edge of that plot screen right to you.
Well, you've got that.
Yeah. Well, one of the best years I had there as far as buck sightings was corn, and I had them leave a border around it, and you'd hunt these inside corners, and they'd follow the corn right around the edge. So
so
on a
big open field like that, and 11 acres is a big field, you'd have to use plot screen or corn or something that has, 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet at least of height to funnel them right to where you want to go, and then give yourself some decent access where you could have a redneck right about here, and those deer would funnel down here and probably walk around that corner, come around that corner, and they'd be right in your lap.
Interesting.
That is.
Interesting. Anything else that you see with that particular property?
The rent income is the big one for me. You'd start off probably with, 5 to 10 acres of bedding grass, and generally a number that we start off with when someone comes to us, and deer densities totally can skew the number, but we generally think about 5% of the property you own should be planted in food plots. You probably can feed about 7 deer per acre on a food plot. So we'll have guys that'll come in our booth and they're like, oh, we're planting food plots. Well, how big are they? Well, we got one that's 100 by 100 and another one that's 100 by 75. And that's really only enough to feed 1 or 2 does. So you really need to do the math. And the food plot thing is on fire as far as people wanting to do it and plant plots and that type of thing. But you need to have enough, too, because to put the plots in and run out of gas the 1st of October before the rut, you fed a lot of does all summer is what you did.
Right.
Sure.
And we've all been through that. Well, we spent a lot of time talking about this particular property. Let's talk real quick before we wrap this whole thing up in a nice bow. Is it too? People are going to say, well, "Why are we having a food plot show right now?" Well, it's Extreme Custom Food Plots is the name of your business, but it's so much bigger than that, which is what I learned yesterday. It's not too soon to start thinking about what you're going to do in February, March, April of next year. And is now the time to start planning stuff like that? That would be my first question, and my second question is. It's the first weekend of August. Is it too late?
To address your first question, what we see happening a lot, and a couple times yesterday it happened in the booth, where a gentleman will come in and, it's tall grass right now and it needs Roundup, and it probably is getting a little bit too late on a property like that one.
Okay.
But as far as planning goes, some of these clearing projects we go on where we clear 1 or 2 acres, now is the time to kind of be thinking about that. You made the statement before that when you're out in the woods or out in the field with this equipment, it doesn't bother the deer. We'll be mulching with our skid steer, and I'll look up at the camera, and there's deer crossing behind me all the time when I'm mulching. And typically, they're not running out of the property; they're running back into it. So I think the sooner a person gets started on that process, the better. So what I'm saying is a person could start opening up a plot for next year, do that in the month of October and then just pull out of there, the 20th of October. And I think you'd be okay in that situation. And a lot of those properties don't have food plots on them anyways. So you're not really bumping deer off of your property because the neighbor probably has a food plot and he's holding the deer on you, and that's why you're thinking of putting one in.
Sure. So if I'm going to plant something this time of year,
what do you go to? Deadly Dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah, Deadly doesn't. It's a mix. There's rye, wheat, oats, and peas in it. We typically start planting it on the Illinois-Wisconsin border. I would say the planting date is probably, the 25th of August to the 1st of September. Somewhere in that window is a good planting date for that product. As you move yourself north, I'm from Green Bay. When we're planting up there today, we're planting north of there. We're putting it in right now. So we're putting it in, what are we today? We're the 4th. We'll probably plant it, till about the 15th up there, and then we'll quit planting it up there, because then you're starting to get a little bit on the late side for the turnips.
So August 15th would be, if you drew a line from Milwaukee, maybe straight west and above, you'd say August 15th is about the cutoff.
Yeah, 15th to the 20th, depending on how far south you were.
How big of a concern is rain? Because it seems like whenever I put in a fall food plot, I put it in the third week of July, which I did this year, and I planted Deadly Dozen. David's gonna plant his here in the next week or two. Sounds like he's gonna be maybe even in better shape than I am. Mine's late. My seed's laid on the ground now for a week and a half without rain.
Yep. You're gonna want to monitor that when you that particular product, and a lot of the brassicas that are sold are all planted in that top quarter inch of ground. So especially on sand, you can get some morning dews, and you can get some of that kind of stuff that might be enough to germinate that stuff.
Yeah, it is germinating a little bit. I did check it, and it is germinating, but it's not. It needs rain.
Yeah, we're behind just about anywhere that we go. We're behind a couple inches of rain, and that would really help right now. But I guess the point that I was making is, when you're planting your food plots this time of year, if it's as dry as it is right now and you're planting on lighter soil, I'd have the tendency to be probably watching for rain before I did the planting, instead of putting something out there and not getting rain for 2.5 weeks and having 30% of it germinate, and then you need to come over the top with something else a little later, to fill that in. So Mother Nature is really, when you're planting a food plot, Mother Nature is the variable in everything. You can go from too much rain to dry, or you can hit the perfect year and you're in good shape. So
this time of year, and I know we're trying to wrap this up, but it's grass, and I'd sprayed it out.
Yep.
It's pretty much dead. Now I've just kind of been waiting. How much tilling do you recommend? I mean, watch the weather, look for rain, just a light disking and throw it down and let the rain do the work?
Yeah.
Or how much tillage would you do?
So the size of the seed pretty much dictates how deep it gets planted. So if you're looking at, if everybody's seen a clover seed, and everybody probably seen a radish seed, and everybody's seen a corn seed. So those brassicas and clovers and stuff like that are planted in that top, quarter inch or eighth of an inch, where your corn and beans are an inch. So when you're looking at a bag of seed, the first thing to think is, the bigger the seed, the deeper it needs to be planted. In your case, the tillage, we do it the same way. So if it's a smaller seed, we're not making a 5-inch seed bed. The biggest mistake I see people do is they get their tiller out, and they got a 2-acre project, and they till on that thing for 8 hours. And they end up with 8 inches of just fluff. And then they'll go out there and they'll spread their stuff on there and roll it, and you just bury the seed. You want a 2-inch when you're doing brassicas, a 2-inch seed bed. Come over there, put your fertilizer down, work it in, spread your brassicas over the top, roll it, and you're done. Over tillage for a lot of people is a killer, and we have to watch that when we've got a no-till drill, and if we over-till, that drill is so heavy, it just punches the stuff in 4 inches deep, and you can have it set on the shallowest setting that it has, and you're still going to bury it.
Well, let's wrap this up. One question that I wanted to ask, and everyone knows that Real World is one of our partners, but from your standpoint, why Real World?
We started this 4 years ago, and I did a little research on all the seed companies at that time, and I wanted a company that had a quality soybean, because there's so many beans that go in spring, And then as I did my research, they didn't have the Deadly Dozen at that time, but they had the Harvest Salad, they had the Plot Topper, and we had been planting those two together for almost 4 years already. So for those of you that don't know it, the Deadly Dozen is actually a combination of the Harvest Salad and the Plot Topper put in a bag named Deadly Dozen. So some people have been using that for 4 years already. As I did my research, they seem to be just an up and coming company. When you looked at the inert matter in the bags, you buy 10 pounds of clover, you get 9.8 pounds of clover. You don't buy 10 pounds of clover and get 6 or 7 like most. So they're good, honest people that own the company. I don't believe they could sleep nights if they felt they were taking advantage of someone. And the quality of the seed, the germs on all the bags are typically over 90%, depending on the product that you're looking at. We started this 4 years ago. We did about 12,000 the first year in seed sales. We may top 150,000 this year after 4 years. So it's definitely a product that people know about and are interested in hearing about.
So tell us, for those of us that are Wisconsin listeners, what's the easiest way to find you? Do you have a website? Do you have a Facebook page?
We have a website. It would be extremecustomfoodplots.com. We have a Facebook page that's Extreme Custom Food Plots. And then our phone number is 920-255-6388.
All right. Well, thanks for spending some time with us here
you.
at Deerfest, and thanks for giving Dave some knowledge on, and me for that matter, on how to go about utilizing that property a little bit better. And I think our listeners will get a lot out of that, because that's a great representation of a property that a lot of people have in this part of the world.
Yep. 80 acres is a pretty common size property that we get to go on.
Right. Well, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, our interview with Scott from Extreme Custom Food Plots. Thanks, Scott, for taking time out of the Deerfest show to sit down with David and I and talk food plot strategy and overall land strategy. It was really cool to see what you would do with a piece of property that largely has very little timber on it and very little bedding cover, and turn it into a really viable spot to hunt some deer. So it was interesting to hear about all those different ideas that you had. If you're looking for the picture of the property that we're talking about, it's going to be on our Facebook page. In addition to that, it'll be on our webpage under the podcast section of our webpage. So with that, I'll begin to close out the show. I want to remind everyone, if you have not given us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or wherever it is you listen to that, if you can give us a 5-star rating, we would be best friends. We would appreciate that a whole bunch, and we can definitely use your feedback, because that's the only way we can get better at what it is that you want to hear from us and what it is that we're doing. So one other quick thing, we are going to be introducing a new White-Knuckle Productions bundle from Ozonics. Again, Ozonics, if you haven't heard or haven't caught it on any of our previous podcasts, they are factory shipped direct. So the only place that you can buy an Ozonics unit is at www.ozonicshunting.com. And to get the White-Knuckle deal, which will be up here in the next few days, which is going to be called the White-Knuckle Run and Gun Package, it'll be up in a few days. You'll just go to their website and go to our landing page. I don't have the URL yet, but I will make an announcement on our Facebook page as soon as that becomes available. If you'd like to capitalize on the deal that's already there, it's www.ozonicshunting.com/WKP. That's all for today. Jason out. Well, there you have it. Donnie and I's interview with Mr. Tim Gillingham, Pro Staff Coordinator for Gold Tip Archery and Pro Staff Shooter for Bowtech Archery. And we couldn't be more excited that Bowtech is on board with White-Knuckle. Donnie's in the process of setting up our bows, and we should have them here by the end of this week. I hope so, Donnie. Please get them to us as quick as you can. With that, I will start to close the show out for the week. Before I do that, however, I just want to remind everyone that pay attention to social media here. We're going to have a brand new bundle coming up from Ozonics. Ozonics, as you know, because I've mentioned it 100 times over the course of the last few months, that they are manufacturer ship direct only, which means you can only buy it through www.ozonicshunting.com. And what they've done is allowed us to have some say in what we want to put together for our loyal listeners and viewers. And what we did is we put together a run and gun package. Now, I don't know if that's going to be available at the time that this episode is released. If it is, great. If it's not, just keep your eye on social media for that bundle. So it's going to be called the White-Knuckle Productions or WKP Run and Gun Bundle. I will wait to share the details of exactly what's included in that bundle and exactly what the pricing is until it's completely ready to go. But I think you're going to be excited to get your hands on what Ozonics has put together for us. So with that, I'll just say thanks again for listening. Thanks again to Ozonics, and have a great rest of your week, guys and gals. Jason out.